The lake was more than just a body of water to me. It was a living piece of my family's history. Nestled deep within the folds of the mountains, the lake reflected every season like a mirror, capturing both storms and stillness. On its northern shore stood my cabin, weathered but proud, its logs darkened with decades of wind and rain. Each morning I'd step onto the porch, coffee steaming in my hands, and feel the world pause as the cool air filled my lungs. Pines swayed gently in the breeze, the damp earth held the scent of rain, and the silence was broken only by the call of a distant bird or the lapping of water against the bank. It was peaceful, untouched, sacred, stretching from my land, and cutting across the water was my bridge. To outsiders, it was just an old wooden walkway, but to me, it was the soul of this place. My father had built it with his own hands nearly 40 years ago. I could still picture him, muscles straining, sweat on his brow, guiding my small hands as I learned how to hammer the first nails. My mother had stood there too, holding planks steady with her smile, as wide as the lake itself. The bridge was how I carried firewood, how I reached the far bank to fish, how childhood summers raced by with the sound of bare feet slapping the hot boards. It wasn't just a structure, it was memory, history, and legacy fused into one. Life around the lake used to be simple. Neighbors respected each other's boundaries, whether they waved from porches or kept to themselves. No rules were needed because everyone understood the unspoken rhythm of the land. But change has a way of sneaking in quietly before it takes over. For us, change came in the form of new money. One by one, shiny cabins began to rise, bigger, flashier, made of steel and glass instead of timber. With them came manicured lawns, loud weekend parties, catered barbecues, and a parade of speedboats tearing across the once quiet water. The city had arrived, and with it came something far worse, the Homeowners Association. At first, I thought little of it. Let them have their newsletters and meetings. They weren't my concern. I owned my land outright. No one had ever told me what to do here, and I didn't plan to start taking orders now. But HOAs are like weeds. Once they take root, they spread until there's no room for anything else. One Sunday morning, I learned just how far their reach was. I was on the porch, fixing the railing, when two men walked up my path. They wore khakis and polo shirts, clipboards in hand, and smiles that were just a little too wide. "Mr. Carter?" one asked politely. "That's me," I answer wary. "We're with the Lakeside Homeowners Association," the taller one explained, his voice smooth and practiced. "We wanted to welcome you officially and discuss a few matters of compliance." I raised an eyebrow. "Compliance? You must be lost. I'm not in your association." Their smiles wavered, but they pressed on. "Technically, everyone around the lake is part of the community. We just want to make sure all properties meet the same standard." I laughed, sharp and short. "Son, this cabin was here before your association was even a thought. My father built that bridge with his own hands. I don't owe your group a damn thing." They glanced at each other, unease slipping through their polished masks. The shorter one spoke. "We'd still like to invite you to our next meeting. We're working toward a unified vision for the community." Community. I cut him off. "That bridge, that dock, this land, it's mine. You can keep your vision." They left, but I saw their eyes linger on my bridge before they disappeared down the path. The visit from the two HOA men left a sour taste in my mouth, but I told myself it was nothing. They'd come, spoken their piece, and left. I thought that would be the end of it. But within a week, glossy flyers began appearing in my mailbox, announcements of HOA meetings, newsletters full of rules, cheerful lists of community guidelines. They spoke of lawn height, dock permits, acceptable paint colors for cabins. It was laughable. I tossed every flyer into the fire, watching them curl and blacken until nothing remained but ash. Then came the phone calls. I never gave them my number, but somehow they had it anyway. A cheerful woman's voice would chirp into my ear, reminding me about dues, about community improvement funds. I'd hang up before she finished her rehearsed lines. The message was clear. They were tightening a noose, and whether I liked it or not, they considered me inside their circle. The first Real clash came one afternoon when I was repairing the bridge. The boards had weathered badly after a storm, and I was halfway through replacing them when a silver SUV pulled up to my driveway. Out stepped a man in a pressed button-down shirt, sleeves rolled neatly at his forearms. His hair was slicked back, and his smile had all the warmth of polished marble. "Mr. Carter," he said, striding toward me like he owned the land. "I'm Daniel Reed, president of a Lakeside HOA. I think it's time we had a talk." I set my hammer down slowly. I don't think we do. He chuckled as if humoring a child. Your bridge has come up at several of our meetings. There are concerns, safety issues, liability, aesthetics. We believe it doesn't align with the community's standards. I stared at him, stunned by his arrogance. That bridge was here before your community existed. It was built by my father on my property. It doesn't align because it doesn't have to. Reed's smile tightened. We're all in this together, Mr. Carter. We can't have structures that compromise the beauty or value of Lakeside. I'm afraid if the bridge isn't brought into compliance, we'll have to take further action. The hammer in my hand felt heavier. You lay a hand on that bridge, and you'll regret it. He raised his palms, mock placating. Let's not get hostile. I'm sure we can resolve this peacefully. But the bridge has to go. With that, he turned and walked back to his SUV, as if the matter were already settled. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Reed smirk, heard his calm, patronizing voice. They weren't going to stop. They wanted to erase everything that made this lake mine, everything that tied me to my family's legacy. And they were circling like wolves, convinced that I was already beaten. That a few days later, I saw proof of their intentions. From my porch, I watched a group of men in HOA vests walking along the far shore with clipboards, pointing at docks and fences, jotting down notes. When their gaze fell on my bridge, I saw one of them shake his head and scribble furiously. My gut twisted. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was a countdown that I began spending more time on the bridge, fixing what I could, reinforcing the beams. Not because it needed it, but because I felt like I had to protect it, like standing guard over something sacred. Neighbors started whispering, some sympathetic, others distant. The new crowd, the ones with money and yachts, kept their distance, watching me like I was a relic standing in a way of progress. And then, one gray morning, I saw them. Trucks parked at the edge of a lake, men unloading equipment, saws, hammers, ropes. My heart froze. The HOA had made its move. I stormed down my path before they could lay a hand on the wood. What the hell do you think you're doing? I shouted. Daniel Reed stepped forward, clipboard in hand, the same smug calmness painted across his face. Mr. Carter, you've had ample notice. The bridge is unsafe and non-compliant. The board voted unanimously to remove it. Board. I spat the word like poison. You don't own this land. You don't own this bridge. You've got no right. He gestured toward the workers, who stood uncertainly between us. Actually, we do. As part of the lakeside community, your property falls under our jurisdiction. We can't allow this eyesore to remain. The rage boiled up in me, so hot I thought I might explode. My father built this bridge with his bare hands. Every nail in it is a piece of my family. And you want to tear it down because it doesn't match your precious color palette. Reed's eyes hardened. Step aside, Mr. Carter. Don't make this more difficult than it has to be. For a long, tense moment, I stood my ground. The workers shifted uneasily, their saws still in their hands, waiting for the order. Then Reed nodded sharply, and the first blade whirred to life. The sound cut through me like a scream that I lunged forward, but two of them held me back. You can't stop progress, Reed said coldly, watching as the saw bit into the first plank. The wood shrieked, splinters flying into the air. My bridge groaned as if alive, protesting the violence. Piece by piece, they tore it apart, boards snapping, beams collapsing into the water below. I shouted until my throat was raw, but didn't matter. To them, I was just an old man clinging to the past, powerless against their machine. When a last section fell with a splash, Reed dusted off his hands as though the matter was trivial. There. Much better. The lake looks cleaner already. He turned to me with that hollow smile. You'll thank us someday. I stood frozen, staring at the ruins bobbing in the water. My chest ached, not from exertion but from something deeper, like they had reached inside me and ripped out a part of my soul. That bridge wasn't just wooden nails. It was my father's voice, my mother's laughter, my own childhood. And now it was gone. Reed left with his men, their laughter echoing faintly across the water. I remained, knees in the mud, staring at the broken remains. Something inside me hardened that day. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd broken me. But all they'd done was light a fire I couldn't put out. For days, I avoided the lake. Every time I walked near the shoreline, the absence of the bridge tore at me like a fresh wound. The water looked wrong, too empty, too exposed, like a smile, missing its teeth. Neighbors went about their lives as though nothing had happened, laughing on their porches, hosting barbecues, taking their boats out for joyrides. To them, the bridge was never anything more than wood in the way. But to me, the lake had been mutilated that I sat on my porch at night, staring into the darkness, listening to the creak of trees and the distant hum of crickets. My father's voice echoed in my mind, telling me how every plank of that bridge had been measured twice, cut by hand, sanded until smooth. He had taught me patience on that bridge, teaching me that real work took time and heart. And in a single morning, Reed and his army of clipboard bureaucrats had erased it, but grief has a way of fermenting into something stronger. Slowly, quietly, anger began to settle into my bones. Not the wild fury of that day, but a deep, smoldering heat, steady and consuming. Reed thought he'd humiliated me, stripped me of power. What he didn't realize was that he had given me clarity. I started walking the shoreline at night, revisiting the places my father had shown me when I was a boy. I traced the lines of the land with my lantern, memorizing every curve, every rock, every inlet. The HOA didn't know what this lake was. To them, it was a property, a commodity to be beautified and marketed. To me, it was alive. It had secrets. It had veins and arteries, channels that carried its lifeblood. The dam at the far end was one such artery, built long before the HOA existed, reinforced again and again by county workers who barely remembered why it was there. That dam held back a massive body of water. My father once told me, half in jest, that if it ever gave way, the entire lakeside would drain in a single rush, leaving nothing but mud and reeds. That thought began to take root in my mind. Not as a passing curiosity, but as a possibility. A weapon. The HOA had stripped me of my bridge, of my legacy. They had treated me like a trespasser on my own land. But I had something they didn't: history. Knowledge. Intimacy with the lake that only someone born here could understand. If they wanted war, they'd chosen the wrong battlefield. My first act of rebellion was small, almost petty. I built a makeshift wooden platform at the water's edge, not a bridge, just a square of planks nailed together. It wasn't meant for crossing, only for sitting, fishing, remembering. Predictably, it lasted less than a week. I woke one morning to find it torn apart, the pieces scattered like bones across the shoreline. A bright yellow notice flapped against a stake in the ground. Unauthorized structure, removed by order of the HOA. I crumpled the notice in my fist until the paper tore. They wanted obedience. They wanted me to kneel. But all they were doing was feeding the fire inside me. Neighbors began to notice the tension. Old-timers, the few who still remember my father, nodded at me with quiet respect, as if silently cheering me on. But the newer crowd, the ones who had moved here for the prestige of a lakeside resort, looked at me like a nuisance, a stubborn weed in their manicured lawn. Daniel Reed, of course, only grew bolder. He started holding HOA meetings at the clubhouse, sending out polished agendas that outlined community beautification projects. Every single one seemed to chip away at what made the lake real: plans to install fountains, artificial lighting along the shore, uniform dock designs. That I attended one of those meetings, sitting silently at the back. When Reed began discussing future demolition of non-standard cabins, my blood ran cold. He wasn't satisfied with destroying the bridge. He wanted to erase everything that didn't fit his vision, including my home. I stood up before the meeting ended. "You're not building a community," I said loudly, my voice cutting through the chatter. "You're building a theme park, and you're stealing this lake's soul to do it." Reed smiled and faltered. "Mr. Carter, you're welcome to your opinion. But progress doesn't stop for sentimentality." I walked out before I did something I'd regret. But that night, under the stars, I made a vow. If they wanted to play gods of the lake, then I would remind them what gods of water could do. The dam was old, but I knew its bones. My father had taken me there countless times as a boy, showing me how the sluice gates worked, how the spillways carried overflow downstream. County engineers came once every few years to inspect it, but most of the time it was forgotten, hidden by overgrown brush, and ignored by tourists. To the HOA, it didn't even exist that I began making quiet trips to the dam, always at night, always careful. The metal groaned when I tested the levers, rusted from disuse, but not broken. The gears still turned if coaxed. The water pressed against the gates with immense, patient weight, waiting to be freed at first. I told myself I was only exploring, reminding myself how it worked. But deep down, I knew I was preparing. I sketched out plans in an old notebook, calculations of water volume, flow rates, how long it would take for the lake to drain. It wasn't instant, no apocalyptic flood, but steady, inevitable, like pulling the plug from a bathtub. Within hours, the water level would drop feet at a time. Docks would dangle uselessly. Boats would tip and scrape against mud, and the manicured resort Reed and his ilk had built would collapse into a wasteland. The thought of it filled me with a grim satisfaction. Not joy, never joy, but justice. They had taken what was sacred to me. I would take what was sacred to them. Every night, I wrestled with doubt. Was I truly ready to destroy the lake I loved? But each time, I remembered the sound of saws cutting into my bridge, the laughter of Reed's men as they left me in the mud. The answer became clearer. The lake would survive. It had lived before them, and it would live after them. But their empire, their resort, their arrogance, it would drown in the emptiness they had created. The plan was set. All that remained was to choose the moment. It happened on a Sunday afternoon, bright and clear, the kind of day when the lake should have shimmered with peace. I was mending a fence post near the edge of my property when I heard the familiar rumble of Reed's SUV pulling up to the clubhouse. A crowd of HOA members gathered, dressed in polo shirts and sundresses, sipping lemonade as though they were at a country club. I leaned against my shovel, watching from a distance, suspicion prickling at me. Reed climbed onto the clubhouse steps and raised his arms for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice full of false warmth, "today marks the next step in our journey to make this lakeside the premier destination in the county." Applause followed. Then his next words froze me. "The board has approved the removal of non-standard properties along the lakefront. That includes any outdated, unsafe, or unsightly structures that bring down the value of our community. We're starting with the Carter cabin." The crowd clapped. My cabin, my father's legacy, my home. I felt the world tilt. Every ounce of restraint I had been clinging to snapped. That was the line. It was no longer about a bridge. It was about erasing me entirely. Reed was declaring war. That night, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my lantern, my old notebook of sketches, and hiked the mile-long trail to the dam. The moon hung low, silvering the water. My hands trembled as I placed them on the rusted levers, feeling their cold bite against my palms. I whispered to myself, to my father, to the lake itself, "Forgive me. This is the only way." Then, with a grunt of effort, I began to turn. The gears screeched, reluctant at first, then slowly giving in. A deep, rumbling groan spread through the earth as the sluice gates cracked open. Water rushed forward. The breaking point came 2 weeks later, frothing white. The lake was nearly gone, into the channel beyond. A shallow basin of stagnant pool, chest heaving, and cracked mud. Lantern flickering. The resort was a ghost town. Of patient stillness, cabins abandoned by angry tourists demanding refunds. The lake was bleeding. Reed finally came to my cabin, flanked by 2 board members. He knocked hard, his jaw set. "Mr. Carter," he said when I opened the door, "we need to talk." I let him in. He looked around my home, at the photographs of my father, the wooden beams blackened with age. His lips curled as though the place offended him. "You've made your point," he said coldly. "The dam is malfunctioning, and clearly you've had a hand in it. But this is destruction. You're killing the community." I met his gaze, unflinching. "No, Reed. I'm killing your illusion. You thought this lake was a blank canvas for your empire. It's not. It's alive. And you never respected that." His face flushed. "Do you know how much money this has cost us? Millions. Do you think the county will stand by while one bitter man ruins everything?" I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Do you know how many generations lived here before you? How many families depended on this lake, not for profit, but for survival? You came here to steal, to plaster your name over what wasn't yours. And you destroyed the bridge my father built with his own hands. You erased him. So I erased you." Word spread quickly. Lawsuits flew back and forth, HOA against the county, homeowners against the HOA, tourists against everyone. Investigators poked around the dam, scratching their heads. No evidence pointed to me. I was just the quiet man who had lost a bridge and sat on his porch each evening, watching the sun set over a barren basin. Neighbors began moving away. Property values plummeted. The $2 million lakeside resort was nothing but a failed dream. Grass and reeds reclaimed the mudflats. Birds nested in places they hadn't touched in decades. Slowly, the lake became wild again, untamed and unpredictable. And I rebuilt my bridge. Not across the lake, it was gone now, but across one of the streams that trickled through the valley. Smaller, humbler, but mine. Each nail I drove into the wood was like a heartbeat, steady, strong. My father would have understood. Years later, people still talk about what happened. Some call it sabotage, others an act of madness. But to those who knew the truth, it was justice. The HOA had come with arrogance, believing money and bylaws could bend the land to their will. Instead, the land reminded them of its power, that I walk the valley often now. The basin holds shallow ponds, reeds swaying in the wind. Wildlife thrives where polished docks once stood. Sometimes I hear echoes of laughter from the past, of neighbors before the HOA, of my father's voice guiding me across the bridge. The resort is gone. The lake is different. But in its wildness, I find peace, because in the end, it was never about revenge. It was about respect for the water, for the land, for the memories they tried to erase. The bridge may be gone, but the spirit of him, lives on in every drop that still flows through this valley, and that's something no HOA can ever demolish.